Hello, we're live again with Louisiana and Mississippi. Myself, Louisiana Beer Reviews, and Brandon in Mississippi. We could probably call his production Outstanding Mississippi Beer Reviews. And in parentheses, occasional Louisiana Beer Reviews. We're looking at one today that's a beer that you will probably never see. And many people, if you noticed, Brandon, when we put this on Google Plus, they said, what is that? What is that beer? Mm-hmm. They'd never heard of it. Even though it's been around for 20 years, this is the 20th anniversary of ZiegenBock. Now, I don't recall them changing the label in 20 years.
I don't either. It's the same label I can remember for a long time.
It's just a standard label. It's like the map of Texas and a bunch of writing. It's not too fancy.
Right.
I have a friend. Now, is this a pry-off or a twist cap?
It's a pry-off.
Ah, no.
No, it's twist cap. Excuse me, twist cap.
Okay, I got it. At first, it didn't want to come up. And it's got a kind of sharp-looking label. I have a friend, David, who's not interested in beer, really, but he lives in Austin, Texas, and he said that out there, he drinks a lot of ZiegenBock and Shinerbock. Well, now he told me that about 2 years ago, okay? So maybe that changed. This beer had a website, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we went to check it. I had checked that website about a year ago, and it was functional. I went to check it when we talked about doing the beer, and there's nothing there. The website is dead. The main, and you know, it was part of a main website called Import. What was it? Import
Craft Specialties brand.
Yeah, Import Craft Specialties Brands, which was an Anheuser-Busch subsidiary. But that website is no longer in existence, from what I could see.
Right.
But Tap Into Your Beer is still around, and so is the main Anheuser-Busch website, and they talk about this beer. There's no Facebook page or anything for ZiegenBock. And they did have a ZiegenBock music festival in Houston as recently as last fall, but it doesn't look like anything's being set up for this coming fall. So
right.
You made a comment that we could be doing the final curtain call on this beer.
Yeah, that's something I do believe to be true. I mean, the best information you can find on ZiegenBock right now is, like you said, on Tap Into Your Beer. This beer was originally brewed to compete with Shinerbock in Texas, and everybody knows Shinerbock is, well, most people know Shinerbock is very popular in Texas, and of course, one of the differences that this beer has from Shinerbock is that it uses the rice adjunct. They brew with the rice adjunct like they do with Budweiser, rather than the corn adjunct like they do with Shinerbock and their other beers.
Yeah, interesting. I can see why this beer, or at least it used to be, and why Shinerbock were very popular, because Shinerbock is similar. Shinerbock is similar to like a Bud Light in a way that it's very thin in the flavor, and it's low calorie, and you can see a lot of people just drinking it, not contemplating it. But then it's dark, so it might appeal to people that want to at least entertain the idea that they're drinking a craft or craft style beer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense.
But this beer is stronger than Shinerbock. Shinerbock is what, 4.4 or something like that, and this is 4.9. So it's at the very low end of a Bock beer, really, right?
Right, it is.
You're right. It's made with the rice, malt extract. I mean, yeah, barley malt, rice, hop extract, I believe that they said, yeast. Mm-hmm. There aren't that many Anheuser-Busch beers made with the polished rice. I know with Budweiser, Bud Light Platinum, the Budweiser, what is that one? Crown, Black Crown.
Black Crown.
Maybe the Michelob Amberbock and this one. This is very, very similar to Michelob Amberbock, but it's a little weaker, right?
Yes, it is a little weaker. Forget how strong is Michelob Amber Bock? I can always look at tap into your beer if I'm curious.
I believe it's 5.1.
I think you're right, but I'm going to check to be absolutely sure. Yes, it is 5.1. You're right.
Yeah, and they both came out the same year, 1995. Now, you know, when this beer came out onto the market and the Michelob Amber Bock, at that time, 20 years ago, they probably were considered by a whole lot of people to be craft beers. But as that sort of power struggle erupted between the major craft beer producers and the minor craft beer producers, then it was rejected as a craft beer. But you know, the terminology craft beer had a different meaning back 20 years ago. Like, I have literature from Anheuser-Busch themselves, and they were saying, here's our line of craft beers. And at the time, that was just craft beer was considered something that was made with, like, you know, more like premier ingredients, right? And more carefully produced handmade beers, specialty beers, as opposed to the mass produced things.
Right.
Which to me always made more sense. And then they came out with this idea that it had to be a beer that was based on really only on production numbers.
Right.
I think that sort of warped the whole view of it. But anyway, so this is formerly a craft beer and probably pretty soon formerly a beer.
Yeah. But
regardless, it isn't even supposed to be in Louisiana. Now, you know, on the old ZiegenBock website, it would say produced in Texas for Texans, only in Texas. So then I'm riding around by Baton Rouge about 4 years ago, and I see it. So I said, what in the world? So I wrote a letter, email to that ZiegenBock site, which of course was Anheuser-Busch.
Right.
I said, why am I buying this in Louisiana? And then it started popping up everywhere in Louisiana, right? So it was a woman, she wrote back and she said, well, it is only available in Texas and Louisiana. Recently, they just, I guess there's so many Texans that move over here to work in refineries or, you know, chemical plants. And then there's a lot of Louisianians that move to Texas for the same reason. So they figured there's probably a market for it. So.
Right. Right.
You saw it in Mississippi?
No, I did not see it in Mississippi. I picked this up at Piggly Wiggly in Louisiana, and just I think it was their last 6-pack over there.
I bought this in Metairie, Louisiana, at Dorgnac's, which has a very extensive beer selection. Even more so now that when they got this beer director named Sonny. Unfortunately, Sonny's leaving Dorgnac's. He brought in all these German beers. I mean, it's incredible what all these German beers he brought in, you know. But he said he's leaving because he's going to become the brewmaster at Gordon Biersch.
Okay.
In New Orleans. So he said he likes brewing beer more than selling it. But that guy's a fascinating guy to talk to. You know, he's really into the beer scene, and he's not into the beer snobbery. Like, he can appreciate everything, you know. But they did have quite a few 6-packs on the shelf, so that was some positive there. Maybe it's going to be discontinued, maybe it won't be. You know, Anheuser-Busch won't really say it. Just one day it'll just be gone, right?
Right. You'll have to email them and ask. I mean, it's one of those things where it's just with this beer, if you put, I said, I probably, before I drink the last of the ZiegenBock, I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison with Michelob Amber Bock.
Oh,
and
good.
ZiegenBock.
That would be a good experiment, because I have 5 more bottles left of this, and of course you can get Amber Bock anywhere.
Yeah.
And Shiner Bock is, you know what, you can get it, but I notice it's not as prominent as it used to be.
This is true.
Maybe people realize how dull it is. I don't see a date anywhere on here. Where's the code? Oh, here we go. It was made on the 33rd day of 2015, which is telling me, what, February?
Yeah. Where did you find the date on yours?
Right below the universal product code.
Oh, okay. I think it's the 15th. Well,
no, 15 is the year, 2015.
2015. So the 77th day of 2015. So that would be fairly recently.
Yours is really fresh, and it says HT. I bet you, Houston, Texas.
Yeah, Houston, because it's brewed at the Houston brewery.
Yeah, it's all made in Houston because it's only sold around Houston. It has a website, ZiegenBock.com, but don't even waste your time typing into it. You won't get to anything.
Right.
It says 4.9% clearly on the bottle. So, you know, Greg's beer reviews, he continuously harps on dates. And he would like this beer, I'm sure, because it has the alcohol by volume, it has the date clearly marked, and even the city. So, well, he may not like it because it's produced by Anheuser-Busch, but he would like the fact that it has the dates. He'll often give a higher score or a lower score based on whether it has the date provided. Well, I have some philosophical problems with that, but you know, he does talk about it, and I do have to agree with him that, I mean, why is it that hard to put a date on a bottle? Why would that be hard?
Right, and certainly that's one of the things some people have an issue with, especially with say breweries that have, like Sierra Nevada, they use the Julian calendar code. So it's pretty much unless you actually know their code, you really can't tell when it's brewed. So if you're really that much of a discerning customer, you can go to the store and can you hear me over there?
Yeah, hear you fine.
Yeah, if you go to the store, you just have your phone out and look and say, okay, this is what the code is. So I can find out when the Sierra Nevada was brewed. And Anchor has their own code as well. It's a pretty funny code, but if you're curious, you can look up as well. They tell you what their code is, so you can figure it out.
But Boston Brewing has the best method. It's like this beer or Miller, this beer should be drunk by this date.
Mm-hmm.
You know, here's the date you should drink it by. Miller Brewing has that, which of course means Pabst has it because Pabst beers are done by Miller. And then Samuel Adams. Now, Anheuser-Busch takes a different approach. They tell you when it was made, and then they say you don't want to go like 3 months past that, or at the worst, in a can, half a year past it. Well, you know, it's not that hard to figure it out, but I couldn't figure it out. So I asked the distributor guy. He was the what his position is called, a bulk merchandiser. I said, Chris, what does this date mean? So he said, I'll show you how to read it. And he showed me. The first 2 numbers is the year, 15. And then the next 3 is the day in the year 2015. Mine is the 33rd day. Yours is the 70 something. And then the next thing is the brewery, Houston, Texas. And then I think the next number is 9 and 6. That's like it's like something to do with the batch number or what line it was, what kettle it was brewed in, and what line it was bottled on, something like that. It's real specific. So I said, in other words, if I get a Anheuser-Busch beer that's bad or off in some kind of way, he said, oh yeah, they're going to know what day it was made, what kettle it was brewed in, what line it was on, and who the guy or the gal was working at that spot. And he said there's going to be a lot of problems for a lot of people if that happens. And I talked to the sales rep for Anheuser-Busch. Well, you know, the distributor, actually. He doesn't work for AB. And he was talking about how he can't stand working for Anheuser-Busch distributor because they're so brutal towards them because of their fanaticism with freshness. And he says it's so high pressure and tormenting. Well, to me, I'm thinking to myself, that's good. That's good. That's good for me. Bad for you because you have to deal with it. It's good for me because they are ensuring that everything's fresh.
Right.
And I mean, he told me a bunch of stories about these.
A lot in the aroma. I mean, you can pick up, like I said, some slight. So what I call that slight brown bread, but just not very strong brown bread type of aroma. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. How about the flavor?
For the flavor, is it's pretty much, it does still have that what I would call the standard beer flavor. It does, but it has it gets some of that, what I call that brown bread sort of flavor going on it, but it's not very strong, but it's also not very sweet. Whereas if you say, by comparison, if you looked at, say, a Shiner Bock, you would get a much thinner flavor that'd be slightly sweeter, where this is a little fuller in flavor and has a bit more of a depth of a flavor going on with it.
Yeah, we were talking about the last 2 weeks about depth of flavor, which is an interesting way to look at beers, I think. Yeah, this beer is interesting. It's like, I think a lot of people, especially if they were maybe coming from a like real deep speculative craft beer approach, would really not like this beer because the flavors are so covert instead of overt, or I should say they're subtle instead of loud.
Right.
But they're there. Like I pick up boiled rice, like my mother used to boil rice, and we put a little butter on it. You know, I used to like that, but I mean, it was so. People will say rice has no flavor. Rice has flavor, but it's so mellow. You have to really think about it. Now, I'm definitely picking up boiled rice, sort of like with Budweiser. If you drink it and think about it a little bit, you pick up that boiled rice. But you do pick up some, like you were saying, some malt, a little caramel. Like I'm picking up a little caramel, and the hop. I'm thinking that IBU must be what, 19 at the most. That would be the outside guess. I think Michelob Amber Bock is around a 19 or something like that.
Yeah, I see what you're getting with the boiled rice flavor. I can definitely get that and say a Budweiser, and even this as well. Like I said, rice does not have a very strong flavor. That's also one of the reasons why, at least in the history of the American style lager, with the West Coast style lagers, or even with Anheuser-Busch, they were using rice as their adjunct because it didn't impart a lot of additional flavor to the beer, but I think it also helps with head retention, which is why some German brewers were using before the purity law was applied throughout Germany and actually enforced throughout Germany. It helps with head retention, doesn't give a lot of flavor, so I think it's why a lot of them were using it, as opposed to, say, corn, which the reason corn was used was to help clarify the beer, and it did produce a sweeter flavor that was popular with others. And if you want a good example of that sort of style of beer, watch a previous video we did on Coors Batch 19.
Oh, right. Yeah, it has that noticeable corn flavor. I probably prefer the rice adjunct by a little margin, a small margin. But not too many people use the rice adjunct. Who uses it? Sapporo, Asahi, this ZiegenBock. I don't think Michelob. Well, the Amber Bock might, but they just say, I believe they just say cereal grains.
They say corn or rice on the tap into your beer.
Corn or rice. And then, of course, the Budweiser line uses rice. I know that's why they took the Bud Ice out of the Budweiser family, because Bud Ice uses corn, and they wanted to make sure that all the Budweiser branded beers would be a rice adjunct. They actually talked about that when I went on a brewery tour. They were saying, well, because I said, well, how come Bud Ice isn't in the Budweiser family? I mean, everybody in the world pretty much recognizes it as a Budweiser beer. And the tour guide said, well, because it's made with corn, and we're trying to make sure that all the Budweiser beers are using and polished rice. I said, oh, that makes sense. And that was a pretty interesting tour. And there is a tour I'd like to take. You got to pay for it, though. It's like $40. Maybe it's $20. I don't know. You got to pay for it, but it's like a 4-hour tour where they take you into the brewery and they take you deep into the operations, and they go specifically into each step of the brewing processes very intricately. So it's not just like, your standard people off the street tour where it's about 50 minutes. And that's a very good tour, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been to Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis.
I have not.
The free tour is fascinating. And they show all the beers they produce. Like you go into this canning facility, which is huge. It's huge. And they'll have all the beers they produce in various bottles and can designs and everything. I mean, everything. Clamato, Hurricane, High Gravity, whatever. But then you can pay for the extra super duper tours. That's something kind of like the Brewmasters tour, and they only have it like once a day. But I think to me that would be really a good tourist attraction to go check out.
Could be interesting.
Not to mention that they'll let you drink beer on that tour, like stuff that you can't normally drink. And then also on the public tour, the free tour, they give you beer to drink, 2 beers, and they rotate it every day, so you don't. And it's so good on draft, of course. And then, but Miller in Milwaukee gives you 3 beers. I got to give them credit. And I'll tell you what, they don't. You know, Miller is really not stingy. When you go on their tour at Miller, they give these huge glasses. It's like, don't you, most people are driving to the brewery, right? And they're going to drive away from the brewery. And the last thing you do before you leave the brewery is drink these 3 very tall glasses of beer of whatever choice. Well, actually, they choose what they bring you. Like, they're going to always bring you 1 glass of Miller Lite, always, because that's their flagship. But then there might be 2 other ones that maybe they're trying out, or it could be anything. It could be Mickey's. It doesn't matter. It just, they'll surprise you. So that's fascinating too. I mean, people go on trips around the country and say, what would be a good thing to do? Well, I'm telling you what, one of the best things I've ever done is brewery tours.
Mm-hmm.
They're so fun. And then of course they make you want to buy a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's your final assessment of this beer? I know what I'm going to say, but you talk first.
Well, my final assessment of this beer is it's a very good beer. I probably could be convinced to say it's an excellent beer. In fact, I would lean towards that. Certainly, I prefer Amber Bock, but as far as an alternative to Amber Bock, if you can find this, I would definitely buy this again if I would see it again, and I would buy it before I ever bought another 6-pack of Shiner Bock, put it that way.
Oh, well, that's like bronze compared to gold.
Right.
Not to disparage Shiner, because, Shiner does make a lot of good, to me, good beers, like enjoyable, especially with that family reunion pack. But the flagship beer is just like, wow, anyway. But this thing here, ZiegenBock, I agree with you. It is not a beer for somebody that's in a rush, and it's not a beer for somebody that's looking for like major in-your-face overt flavor. You got to have a little patience, and probably better to sit down and just drink like one after the other and just really think about it. But so that you can get a grasp of it. It would be a shame if it was discontinued. Maybe Anheuser-Busch realized that Shiner Bock, is insipid as it is, and I hate to rip on it, but I mean, I would go to that brewery tour too if I ever go to there. But they probably like, you know what? Let's just throw in the towel on it. Screw it. It's been 20 years. It's never really caught fire. Most people never heard of the stuff. You and I could be totally wrong. It might be around for 50 more years, but it doesn't look like it's going to be, does it?
No, it doesn't. And plus, there's also the business decision that can be made. Say, wait, don't we have a beer called Michelob Amber Bock, which is the same style as this beer? So why are we continuing to brew ZiegenBock? That's also something you look at.
Right, and Amber Bock is really a fantastic beer. You know what I mean? It's like people in Texas, they might buy it if Anheuser-Busch will spend $10 a year on advertising.
Right.
Because they're like notorious for neglecting really outstanding beer brands.
Mm-hmm.
Not as bad as Miller. Miller's really bad for that, but Anheuser-Busch does do that. They'll take really good beer brands and they'll do nothing with it. But it's some kind of algorithm. I'm sure it's some kind of business algorithm they use. Like they figure out how they could produce a product and do advertising for a few months and then do nothing. But then the beer can still be profitable and it could go on for 20 years or more. And then once it reaches the point where it's just breaking even, then they kill it, Mm-hmm. I think that's what they did with Bud Dry.
Yeah.
Just sort of a fascinating beer. I don't know if you ever had Bud Dry.
I never did. I remember the advertising campaign for that one. It said, why ask why? Drink Bud Dry.
Right. I used to buy that all the time, and then when it started hitting the skids, You know, at one time back in the early 90s, it was extremely popular. I mean, it was really popular. And the interesting thing about Bud Dry was 5% alcohol, just like Budweiser, but it was like super light in the flavor. It's sort of like, well, I guess it was replaced by Bud Select, you know, but which is lower alcohol. But then when they kind of like relegated it to the we don't care segment, you could get a 12 pack of that for $5.75 or whatever, $5.99. So I would just buy it all the time. It was so drinkable. It was like one of the smoothest beers you ever had, you know. But then the sales just eventually got to the point where it just would not sell. Like they told me at the grocery store, they said literally you were the only person that would buy it. So we would sell one 12 pack maybe every month or two. So obviously there was no reason to keep producing it. Another one I bet you've never had is a really obscure beer like this. Unless you live in Minnesota. Now, if you live in Minnesota, it's like the beer, the beer of Minneapolis, which is, you know, strange. It's like most Americans have never heard of it, but if you go to Minneapolis, it's the beer. It's on every billboard, TV all the time, all restaurants and ballparks. It's called a Michelob Golden Draft Light.
I have heard of that beer, and I've heard of Michelob Golden Draft. It's just I've never had them. It's not distributed in the Southeast market, so there you go.
Incredible. I mean, it's I think it's 4.7%. It's almost a mimic of Miller Genuine Draft, but it's different. You know, it's I let my daughter try it. Well, you know, she's not gonna do like you and myself, sit around researching beer, but she tried it and she was like, wow, this is really good, you know. I said, oh, okay. But anyway, ZiegenBock, this will probably be the last video ever produced talking about ZiegenBock, more than likely. So most people that watch this will say, I've never heard of it. They haven't tried. It's not that they haven't tried it. They've never heard of it.
Right.
So long, ZiegenBock. If we're wrong, good, because we hope we're wrong.
Yes, we do.
And I got 5 left. So I am really enthusiastic about your idea of doing a blind taste test between Shinerbach, ZiegenBock, and Michelob Amberbach. Now, I may have a problem figuring out which is Amberbach and ZiegenBock, but I almost guarantee I could tell you which one was the Shinerbach in a blind taste test, but I can't say that until I do it, right? Just like the Ice House Edge. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. The Natty Daddy, 6%, and the Natural Ice. People are waiting for me to do that blind side by side. So anyway, thanks for joining me, and we got a lot more lined up, like for instance tomorrow night with Bass Pale Ale. Okay, thank you, folks.